Hi guys, so today I want to talk about Whitewood Spright, and I want to use this as a case study for how to think about deck building when it comes to combining engines or using a sub-engine in a larger engine. So my last video, I was talking about Whitewood Centurion as a case study for understanding what makes a deck good with a focus on ratios. So what kind of math supports how many non-engine cards you should be playing and those types of things. And so similarly, this will be using Spright Whitewoods as a case study of how to think about deck building when it comes to merging engines or adding sub-engines to a deck. There are three guiding principles, in my opinion, that I will lay out, and then I will show you some combos in a vacuum, and then I will show you two actual games. So the first principle is the one that I think comes most naturally to everyone, and that is, what does this do to my ceiling? So how does my end board change if I add these cards into my deck? And I think this comes most naturally because usually players, especially casual players, when they test things out, they're testing in a vacuum. They're not looking at what happens if you get hand trapped in particular spots, or maybe they're just testing, at home by themselves or whatever, or they're playing in an environment that's not super competitive, and so you aren't getting hand trapped in optimal spots. So it's natural to think, if I'm building a deck, what does my end board look like? But the other two components are equally important. So the second one is, how effectively can I play through interruptions if I add this into my deck? So if I add Sprite cards into my Whitewoods toy deck, does that change how I can play through hand traps, for example, or breakers? And the third element is, how does this impact the non-engine that I am able to play? Like, do I have zero space for non-engine? In which case, it is almost always not a good idea to do this because you need to have space for non-engine. Otherwise, you are conceding to whatever the die roll tells you. And then the rest of your games and the outcome of your match is based on your siding patterns and who won the first game. So I would never ever there's not a single deck I can think of right now that I would say you should be happy playing no non-engine. Okay, so those three principles, what does it do to the ceiling of your deck? How does it make you play through interruptions? And what non-engine space does it leave you with? Those are the three things that you should keep in mind. Now, let me just briefly go over the ratios in here first. This is not as polished as it could be, but let me give you a basic idea of how I'm thinking of this. So the Sprite cards everyone knows combine with level 2 monsters, and the main cards in this deck are level 2. The best cards in the Whitewoods engine are the level 2s. The tuners are more like supporting cards that help you play out your game plan, and they're necessary to ladder into your standard synchros. And since these are level 2, obviously, if you have access to Sprite monsters, then you can special summon those monsters. So that's a very, very basic idea of synergy. Now, synergy is something that is not immediately obvious just if you're theorizing something, because, for example, one of the comments that keeps coming up my videos is, what do you think about Fiendsmith? Isn't there synergy with the Fiendsmith cards? You can equip these link monsters to your Fiendsmith monster on the field, and then that's a spell or trap. So why don't you play this card? Because you can send the spell or trap to activate your Whitewood card's effects. But I don't consider these to be good examples of synergy because having a free send just to be able to play your engine, just to attempt to play your game and start laddering is not synergy. Synergy is when you send Toy Soldier, this card brings itself back out from the grave for free, so you paid nothing, and then it gives you a search, which is either box, which will continue to give you resource, or if you already have box, it can give you actual engine. That is synergy. Sending something for free is not synergy just to have the bare minimum to be able to play. So I don't like the Fiendsmith cards so far. I could be wrong about this, and maybe people will show a better way to play Fiendsmith in this deck. But in my view so far, the end boards just look like a worse version of Fiendsmith in any other good meta deck. So back to the Sprite stuff. We know that the bare minimum is that these cards are level 2s, just like the bare minimum was we have something to send to play our engine. And so the question is, am I better off with these cards in my deck in terms of playing through non-engine and in terms of what my ceiling looks like? Now, the last principle was, how much does it impact my non-engine? And here we can see that I am sticking to a ratio of about 9. So 3 Dark Ruler, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 power spells. And if you didn't listen to my last video, I go over this, so I'm not going to cover this in detail. But the idea is if you can't fit 15 non-engine spots, which is the sweet spot for low impact hand traps like Ash Blossom, Veiler, Imperm, so on, then you should be focusing on extremely high impact non-engine cards like Dark Ruler or Evenly Matched. I happen to like Thrust in this deck because it can give you Legend and Woes, and as I've explained in every other video, even if your opponent does not control a monster, if you set Legend and then you send it off a card and it brings itself back, you still get to use it when it comes back because it's not the same card that Thrust set. And Veiler is only in here because you can search it as part of the combo. And I value having searchable hand traps because a searchable hand trap is better than a drawn hand trap because you have access to it through engine, so you don't have to rely on just happening to draw it. And it diversifies the locations that your interruptions come from. So it's not just that you have like a Diabell on field that can bring out a Silvera, or that you have Woes in your back row where you can go into Synchro for like another Silvera or whatever, but you also have something else in your hand. So, you don't just get blown out by like a Lightning Storm or a Dark Ruler or whatever. So I always like to show that if your deck can put interruptions in different places, it makes it a much better deck. However, I am not playing Gallant Granite in the extra deck. If you haven't watched any of my other videos, Gallant Granite is a card that is very easy to make in this deck because you have so many level 4s with the toy engine, and you search Nib, and so you can do a standard combo route where you search Nib and Veiler, and so you have the like in air quotes, the god combo of hand traps that you can play under yourself because you recycle your cards from the grave. Last few things is Spright. If anyone who's played Spright knows that one angler feels extremely bad based on if you already draw it or you're later in the game and you want access to cards from your deck, because when you dump the angler off of Sprint, you can only special summon the Nimble monsters from your deck. So if you've like already used Beaver, you're only going to get one Beaver off the angler. However, I'm also trying to balance not having bad draws when I add this engine in. Like if you add an engine in and you just have a bunch of shit draws, it's usually not going to be worth it. I also want to add in that the main normal summons of the deck here is Asteria, and the magical number that I've referenced in my last video, which I think was popularized by Jesse Codden, is 5 normal summons. So there are 6 good ones here, and this is more of, I'm considering like an engine requirement than a normal summon, but it is technically also a normal summon for your ratios. And yeah, I'm trying to keep the Spright cards at the smallest amount possible so that I have space for my power spells while still playing the best card in the deck, Spright Starter, which is both a starter and an extender. And if you've learned anything from my other videos, you know that cards that are both starters and extenders are extremely good. And if there's one card you have to choose to play out of an engine, it is always the card that is both a starter and an extender. So this is not a starter and an extender, because if you draw only this and no other Spright cards, you can't do anything. But this always works no matter what. Okay, so let's go into the gameplay, and then I will reflect on some mistakes made and maybe some changes you could make in deck building and what I think of Spright in general. Okay, did I make any changes there? Okay, so let's go to replays, and let's look at the first combo in a vacuum. So this is basically a Whitewood's hand that happens to have a Spright card. So I thought this would be like a good example of something to show. This would be very bad for going second because we didn't draw any of our breakers. Now, so Toy Box, obviously you set the tank and the soldier, standard stuff. Activate Reset. Usually you don't commit your normal summon if you don't have to. So Reset sends the soldier. Soldier brings itself out because we control box. We can search whatever we want. We special summon the Arcia, and that can send a tank. And if you've watched one of my older combo videos on Whitewoods, you can see here that one of the benefits of going for this without your normal summon is that you are on 4 summons now, and you can go into Appaloosa if you want. Now, in my standard combos, I usually then go for the Gallant Granite, and I search the Veiler, so I have the God combo in hand and Apple on field, and it's a very strong board, but I'm not going to do that here. Instead, I then use my normal summon. I have access to box in my hand, so I don't mind sending the box. And also, in general, even if I only have one box, like unless I think my opponent is playing something very weird like Crow, or I think that they're going to use their hand trap in a very strange place, like on the Diabell, usually they would have used their hand trap already. So I've checked for lots of different types of interruptions, and now I have Apo on field for Nib. So they would have to like nib and chain Veiler to my Diabell to stop what I'm about to do. But sometimes, even if I only have one box, I still send the box and I add the box back to hand so that it's safe. Like they can't destroy it on their turn, and then I don't have access to it to cycle through my resources again. So I actually am a very big fan of sending box and adding it back. Or if you have access to another box, like because you searched it or whatever, that you just send that box. I think that that can be good because it keeps your resource game like hidden in your hand, so it's not accessible by your opponent. Okay, so standard ladder here into the Diabell, and I add back the box because there are no other targets. And also, like, obviously, I could send this and add it back, but I think sending the box and adding back the box gives them more of the impression that I don't have another box in my hand. I actually have all three. But if I didn't add back the box, like this card is so crazy that if they know anything about the deck, they might think like, okay, he probably has another box. Otherwise, why would he do that? So yeah, now they may think that these are a bunch of other unknowns that could all be hand traps or something, and you never know. Like it can change the way that they play. So anyhow, I had summoned blue when I had the chance when I had a level 2. So now I'm going into a standard Spright combo here, where you make the Sprint, you dump the Angler, you summon out both Beavers. Here I am now this is pretty important if you actually want to play this version of the deck. Before you lock yourself, if you have a a tuner that you want to bring out of your graveyard, you need to do that before you lock yourself with Gigantic. And the reason this is important is, well, there could be a couple reasons. If you are making other types of link plays, like if you wanted to go into an IP or a Little Knight. I'm not playing IP in this build, which I think may be a mistake, because the Synchro 12 cards don't come up super often in this build. So I think like these could come out and you could play other cards. So if you need to use this as material, you want to get that on the field before you lock yourself. And I summon the Gigantic, and then I bring out the Carrot. And wait, how do we check field? Okay, so this is the end of the sample combo here, and what I want to show is usually when you add a sub-engine in, you don't have infinite space in your extra deck. Like, you actually care about the things that your deck is supposed to be doing otherwise, and you don't want to cripple that to accommodate a new engine. So I'm trying to get as much value out of the Spright cards as possible. I don't just want to turn my Gigantic into, like, a Masquerena, for example, because I want to get value off of the Sprint, where I have something to detach so that I can get the bounce. And then if for some reason this survives, then maybe I'll have the option to bring, like another card out of my deck or whatever. And if you do this type of setup where your field is full, ideally, not saying that this is going to happen, you want to like sprint, detach your material to bounce, so this is being used, and then then as your carrot negate, you can send one of these cards and get value off of it, clear stuff from your field, activate woes, bring out the level 2, and then you have the material to go into Silvera. So you obviously have to think about like how to like clear your field, so that you can do the synchro play. Okay, here's a second test. Now this is kind of the opposite, where it's like all Spright cards and then one actual Whitewood starter. So normally, because you want to climb, you have to do the Whitewood stuff first because you don't want to lock yourself with Gigantic. Although, you obviously don't have to make Gigantic super early. So we have access to the trap here. We go into the Arciela and we send the spell, which will reset itself. And that triggers the Asteria, which brings itself back. Now, important thing here that you should not forget when you're playing this deck, even though this is like basic, when you are laddering into Diabell, you don't want to have no spells and traps in your grave to add back because you're not going all out on card economy. So even though I already sent Legend and reset it, I'm happy to activate it again to search whatever extender because I know that I'm about to get it back off of the Diabell. So if I don't have something better to get back, I at least want to have used the card properly. So now here I have a level 2 on board again. And so that gives me an opportunity to put a Spright body on board. And maybe I should have gone over this a little bit more, but because I had access to starter, the carrot ended up not being part of my combo, but I wanted to have a fourth body to go into a four material Appaloosa. So this is a little wonky because it's almost like the other way around of the other combo, but I just wanted to show that you still can do this. You still can make this board. And one of the reasons why it can be realistic is usually your opponent will have used their hand traps before to try to stop you getting to Diabel or to get the search off the Arciela or whatever. And so maybe you didn't go into this, but you can still go into like an Appo or whatever. And yeah, anyhow, so then you continue with the Spright plays and you get access to Smashers. And I think Smashers is probably better to main here than the Trap because it's more flexible either side of the dice roll, whereas going second, the Trap doesn't do anything. And then it's the same situation here again, where because you can't play like infinite extra deck space, you want to get as much as possible out of the cards that you actually are playing. So I'm leaving the Gigantic on board to get the bounce with this, and then hoping to tribute one of these so I can get both the negate and the destroy, and make sure that we have space for the woes. Also, one other thing that I should add is that if we do move into a breaker format, this end board is actually very likely in a breaker format because they wouldn't have interrupted you during the combo. You need to ask yourself what happens if they just drop Dark Ruler or like droplets or something like that, because then none of these cards do anything. And so that's why I really like, first of all, that there's a deck that has a trap like this that can go for a Synchro Summon. Oh, and by the way, one other thing that I should mention is these monsters are generic. So a tuner and a non-tuner, tuner and a non-tuner, even Diabel is a tuner, non-tuner. This card, the Trap, it says that you special summon a White Woods monster from your hand or deck, and then you can synchro summon a White Woods monster. It doesn't tell you what the materials have to be, so you can use the Spright monsters as part of your materials. So like if you've already used the red to tribute one of these monsters to, like negate and destroy a monster, and then you bring out the Woes of the White Woods, for whatever tuner monster, you can use the red as material. I just thought I would mention that because that actually does come up pretty often. Yeah, so, okay, now let's go into the actual games. This one is kind of a weird game because I'm like, okay, how realistic is this hand? We are playing Spright Starter as a 3 of, and this is a 3 of. So these are normal draws. We're playing Dark Blue as a 3 of, so it's a normal draw. Blue is a 1 of. We don't expect that we're going to see this, but we do have a bunch of Spright monster 1 ofs because we have the blue, we have the jet, we have the red, the carrot. So it would be normal that we draw at least one of those cards. So technically, even though it's very unusual to draw 2 of a 3 of, like statistically it's very unlikely, this is still kind of a normalish hand. And also, I want to say, while this guy is comboing off, he's playing Fiendsmith Chimera, that drawing one high impact card when our ratios are around 9 or between like 9 and 12 is a typical hand. So it's not like, oh, he's so lucky he drew Dark Ruler. The deck is built to be statistically most likely to give you one non-engine card and then all engine cards. That is why the ratios are the way they are. Obviously, it's not going to happen every time, but yeah, so this is just, the deck was built to draw hands that are kind of like this, aside from drawing 2 of this. And then, the hand could have maybe been substantially better if this was something else. Now here, this is kind of an important, possibly debatably mistake on his part. He has set up an Apple, a Wave Hiking Caesar, and he has the Kotal and the Sword Knight engraved. So Kotal is the one that can negate and destroy effects that target his monsters if he controls Chimera on the field, and then Sword Knight is the one that can negate a monster if he controls Chimera on the field. One thing that you should always remember against this deck, which is actually good, post Fiendsmith, actually a good deck, is that these fusion monsters, their name change is part of the effect. If it is negated, it is no longer considered that card, and then their grave monsters, the Sword Knight and the Kotal, cannot be used because their conditions are not met. And one of the things that makes this deck very strong, that is very underrated in my opinion, is the fact that they have negates in the grave because they're less accessible to you than just dropping a Dark Ruler or a droplet or hand trapping them or whatever. Them being in the grave or like you having hand traps in hand are not accessible places usually for your opponent to interact with aside from particular scenarios. So that is a very strong part of this deck where they have an in-engine way to place multiple interruptions in their grave that you don't have access to. Okay, so let's review this board real quick. Actually, let's draw my card first. Okay, so now you can say that statistically, this is very unfortunate that we have drawn two starters and two soldiers. So this is not a normal hand. However, we want to be able to play here. We know that they will have access to Chimera Fusion because that's part of their combo. And I was thinking that one way that they could very easily play around Droplet or Dark Ruler is if they had not used all of their materials immediately to go into this card, and instead they had maybe saved the Berthamit, unless they have like a plan for cycling through these resources on my turn, to be able to bring that card out on my turn after a breaker has been used. Obviously, he doesn't know the deck that I'm playing. He doesn't know that I'm on breakers. Otherwise, he may have played differently. But I'm just explaining to you that there are ways to play around these types of cards when you're on good decks. It's not just like, oh, he drew Dark Ruler. Like, I lost walking you. He drew it out. That's not how it works. You're a scrub if you think like that. Now, okay, what's important here? I know that Dark Ruler beats the Appaloosa. I know that it beats the Wave Hiking Caesar. And I know that it beats not only this card, but it beats the Kotal and the Sword Knight Engraved. So my one single card would trade with 1, 2, 3, 4 cards. So this card is my win condition this game. I have recognized, this is really important, guys. When you draw a hand and you see the board that your opponent has made, you have to recognize what has to resolve for me to win. And then you must resolve this. So because Diabels is on field, in case you don't know what this does, so your opponent must set spell and trap cards before activating them, first of all. So I can't use starter. This card is straight up dead because it's a quick play. So if I set it, I can't activate it this turn. That's why this is really good against Tenpai, by the way, because they can't just like add the Kaiman and use the Kaiman. They have to set the Kaiman, which means that they can't get the summon that turn. So this card like just massacres Tenpai. But then it says, if a spell/trap card becomes set on the field while this card is in the monster zone, you could target a card you control and a card your opponent controls, destroy them. So if I set this Dark Ruler, even though it is a normal spell and I can activate it afterwards, he has the ability to respond because this will trigger because I have set a card and he can pop it and I will lose the game. And there's nothing else that I can do because this hand is not playable. I can't use the starter, even though he will have used the pop because I can't activate it because it's a quick play. There's no way for me to special the blue, and I can't use both normal summons so that I have a 2 to go into sprint. So this must resolve. So I'm like, okay, I need to bait this card out, or if I set a card and he does nothing, it means that he probably isn't going to use this, and then I'll set the Dark Ruler after and flip the Dark Ruler, and he can't respond with monster effects. So he flips the Chimera Fusion, okay? And this is perfect for me because it means that he's not saving this for after Dark Ruler. So he's playing like he's using everything. He's blowing his entire load because for whatever reason he thinks like if he puts everything on field, it'll just be harder for me to deal with. So he summons the Magnum, okay, and he immediately pops my set card. Now you might be thinking, he just activated your Toy Soldier, or rather the conditions were met. If this set card in the spell and trap zone is sent to the graveyard, so that's the activation procedure, you can special summon this card. By the way, if you think it's weird that I say activation procedure, it's because this is not cost. Cost is when you see a semicolon. This is a regular colon, so that's just the activation procedure, not the cost. That's why, like, if you see like mention about targeting a card and then a colon, targeting is not the cost. It's just the activation procedure. A little side note there. Now, if I activate this card, he's obviously just going to Appo. And if there's any other way for me to like trigger this somehow, theoretically, after Dark Ruling the Appo, like why would I use it now? So this is not resolving now, no matter what. Okay, so now I'm like, all right, he used his Magnum on my Toy Soldier, but he didn't use his Diabels, so it's not safe for me to set the Dark Ruler yet. So either I set the starter, he does nothing, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to set another Dark Ruler. He's probably going to be thinking, he's just setting cards and he's going to pass or whatever. Maybe he's playing a trap deck, whatever. Or he's going to pop this right now, and then he can't stop the Dark Ruler. So he pops it, because maybe he's thinking, this is he's about to play the relevant card. So he pops this, and I'm like, all right, surely there's nothing that he can do to stop me setting a spell. So I set and I activate Dark Ruler. So now this is gone, and also because he used his Chimera fusions very quickly, he has no way to turn back on the Kodal and the Sword Knight. So now I can actually play, and I have Spright Starter. So I activate the starter, I summon the jet. So now my blue technically, can be summoned, but he has droplets. He sends the apple, which is useless, whereas these cards will be useful on the next turn, but apple's attack is 0, so it doesn't do anything for him. So he droplets the jet. And this is probably one of the few plays he's made in my turn that is maybe correct to do, because he could think like droplets doesn't stop the starter, and if he saves the droplets for the thing that starter brings out, he's already given me 2 bodies, and then I can go into sprint. So he could save the droplets for the sprint, but maybe he's thinking if he uses it here, it just shuts down my entire combo. But I have the blue in hand, and I now have red, so I'm like, okay, if he has nib or some shit, like at least I can stop that. Or if he has like a Veiler in hand or something, I can stop that. And I realize at this point that I am not getting to my Whitewoods engine this turn, so I might as well summon the Toy Soldier because I don't need to use my normal and get box. And I'm like, okay, also, if I can't kill him, then I will activate the box and remove draws that I don't want from my deck. So I set another soldier and a tank, and I finally go into sprint, dumping the angler, bringing out the beavers, and then he scoops. So in my opinion, one of the things that distinguishes better players from worse players is usually how quickly they use their interruptions. Like, people that just will Ash the first thing you do or Veiler Imprint the first thing you do, they either don't know what your deck does and they're just praying, or they are maybe not like particularly good players, and so they just want it to work. And so when you use all of your resources this early, the player who has the more unknown like card economy, so like all of my cards are in my hand, has an advantage because like I know what to interact with and he doesn't. So the longer you save your interactions, the more valuable they potentially become, like a Chimera Fusion. Okay, the last replay I will show you, and then I will do like one more pass over on this deck and say like maybe what I would change or not change. So now I'm going first. This is a bit of an awkward hand. We have drawn, I would say, a hand that is not statistically abnormal. We have drawn 2 of our high impact non-engine, which is not likely, but it is not super unlikely either. So we set these cards. These are cards. Remember, even if you can't always use these, you always want to thin your deck from stuff that you don't want to draw. So we set those 2 cards, and here's what's awkward, okay? Normally, if you have a bunch of Whitewoods cards in your hand, normal summoning the Sylve using your normal summon is actually fine because you're going to check for a bunch of hand traps. If they Veiler or Imperm you here, then you have checked for the Veiler or the Imperm, and then you would simply just take the Reset in your hand or the Arcia, and you would summon it, and you would send one of these, and you go full combo. Now what happens is he Ashes. So if he Ashes, it means that I can't add the Legend, which would give me the Reset, which would send the Soldier and give me full combo. But also, it tells me, unless this guy is a bad player and doesn't know what he's doing, he probably doesn't have Imperm or Veiler. Because there's no reason to Ash this if you have Imperm or Veiler, because you could save the Ash for something else. Whereas you can't Imperm or Veiler, like the Toy Soldier effect in the grave or whatever. So I'm thinking maybe he doesn't have any more hand traps because of that. And so I draw 2 off of the talents, and I would not say that this is like particularly lucky. I think that these are normal draws. I've gotten more draws, and I've drawn 2 of my high impact cards. So now I have the starter, which allows me to put a 2 on board for the blue in my hand to become live. And I also have searched the Spright Smashes off of the jet. We go into the sprint. I think I forgot to summon my red a little bit earlier, so that's a mistake on my part. So I finally summoned the red. I activate the Gigantic Spright. For a second here, I entertained the idea of Gigantic Spright bringing out Asteria, because it's a level 2. And I am not playing Broomy, I think that's what it's called, that somebody actually asked me about in a comment recently, because it's a very, very bad draw. And I don't think it does enough for your ceiling. In the normal Whitewoods build, you could use it to go into Herald of the Arclight, which is an Omni Negate and like a pseudo Floodgate. In this particular scenario, it would have just been another level 2. But I wouldn't have been able to trigger my toy soldier anyhow because I would be under my own gigantic sprite. So I think even in this scenario, I wouldn't play Broomy. And bringing out the Asteria would really just be for like a weird follow-up where I'm leaving it on field and hope that I live. But then I was like, but what if I just die? Like my end board isn't actually particularly strong. I probably need to commit everything to as good a board as possible. So now we have the Sprind and the Gigantic, which we're not using as materials for anything because we're not playing a very large extra deck Sprite package. So we want to milk this for all it's worth. Okay, so we get the bounce by detaching a material. We have the Spell Negate. We have the Monster Negate, potentially both destroying something. And we have the Smashers, which we're maining because it's more flexible in the dice roll, whereas the Trap isn't. Okay, and then we just have these cards, which are not doing anything right now. And we technically do have Beaver for follow-up, although we don't have many other like Sprite style cards to go through in the extra deck. Okay, and evenly matches dead in the hand. Also, just remember that the Ash Blossom, we got the good read on that. He didn't Imperm or Veiler, and he ashed, so it was a good idea to think that he probably didn't have anything else. Okay, so now he summons Tour Guide, okay, and I could use my Spright Red and negate this, or negate and destroy it. But I'm thinking, you know, he could be playing Talents, he could be playing Thrust. I don't want to play into those cards if I don't need to, and I don't even know what he's on yet. So I want to let this resolve, and he brings out the Goblin card, okay? And so I'll be honest, I do not really know what these cards do, aside from it's to do with like detaching materials to do stuff. So he activates a spell now, all right? Add a Goblin monster from your deck to your hand, then you can apply the following effect. So already this is like a crazy card. This is a very, very good card to have. Detach a material from a monster on the field. So this is part of the same effect. Add a Goblin monster from your deck to your hand, then you can detach an XYZ material for a monster on the field, and if you do special summon a level 4 or lower Goblin these nuts from your hand, that's fucking crazy, because this removes one of my own interruptions. Not only does this give him engine and free bodies, but it actually removes an interaction because I can no longer sprint because I won't have a material to detach. So I read that and I'm like, oh shit, like I have to negate that. I don't have a choice. So I negate it and I don't need to destroy it. So I just send a useless body. And then this dude activates the other effect, which I didn't read because, you know, I play Yu-Gi-Oh! And it says you can banish this card from your graveyard, detach an XYZ material from a monster on either field, then you can add a Goblin monster from your graveyard to your hand. So this card is crazy. So I see that and I'm like, all right, I don't want that to happen. Do I use my Spright Carrot? Now he has monsters on the field, which means there's no risk of evenly. And I'm like, okay, if he was going to droplet me, I can't do anything about that anyhow because I can't respond. So most likely, this is one of the higher impact spells I can negate, and I will save myself an interaction. So I'm just going through the thought process here, right? So I'm like, you know what? If he has to detach an XYZ material, and then, so that means that he has to detach the material to do the next thing. So detach the XYZ material, then add a Goblin monster. I'm like, all right, that's not happening. So I chain the starters, banish a Spright card from my grave so that I can banish my own Gigantic and this Goblin monster because I'm thinking, you know, maybe he can like get this shit back from the grave or whatever. Yeah, because it says if this card's in your graveyard. So I just saw if this card's in your graveyard, fuck that, banish that. Also, you're not getting my material. So that's the thought process there. Then he summons Typhon, and that, you know, obviously this doesn't require, you know, more than like 5 brain cells. That tells me he's done playing. But he makes a mistake here, which is he doesn't immediately attack. And the reason for that is that Typhon, where does it say here? While this XYZ summon monsters on the field, neither player can activate the effects of monsters with 3,000 or more attack. So if he uses the effect right here, which doesn't target, obviously I can negate it, but also I can send my Sprind, which I no longer need to keep because my Gigantic is gone. So I'm not getting an interaction from this, and destroy his monster, and then he can't even summon anymore. So what he should have done is he should have attacked probably the Sprind, because now my Smashers is gone. Like, there's no way that I have another card. Like, there's no way that I also have to trap. Like, that would be crazy. I would have had to have hard drawn it. He should have attacked this first, and then if he wanted, he could use the effect to bounce, which would then not even do anything because I just resummoned it on my turn, but at least he would have destroyed a monster. But now, instead of even attacking, he uses the effect, shotguns it, and then I red and I destroy it. So now I'm like, okay, Um, maybe I can kill him now. I have two Sprite monsters. So you guys always remember that box has another effect. One of the effects is, and this box is not once per turn, so technically if you drew two boxes, you could box, set soldier and tank, activate another box and pop them. Destroy up to two cards in your spell and trap zone. So I have no other way of getting to my White Wiz engine right now, aside from this soldier while I control box. So the soldier comes out, okay, remember that I'm only playing one Sylve in this version because I was trying to like cut cards, so I add the Arcia. And here I make a mistake. It's not a very big mistake, but I make a mistake because I control a box, which means that tank, I can tribute this monster, cost, because that's the semicolon. Special summon a level 6 or lower monster from your hand, or if you control box, you can special summon it from your grave instead, and does not negate. So what I should have done is I should have tributed the tank and special summoned the Sylve from the grave, which would give me a search as long as I have something left in my deck to search. And then the Arcia would have been a free special from hand, so I wouldn't even have used my normal summon yet. And then, like, if I had searched Legend off of this, I could still summon Asteria, normal summon Asteria, because I wouldn't have used my normal. But anyhow, I didn't think of that, and I was just playing too quickly, and I normal summoned the Arcia. I sent the box. I activate another box because I'm like, oh wait, I want to bring this back from the grave with my box on field. So then I searched the woes. Yeah, because in my head I was thinking like, I've never played this version before, so I wasn't thinking about the OTK at this point, and so I just added the trap. So then I go into Arciella, I send the trap, I add the reset, and the woes sets itself back. Okay, now I ladder. Remember, guys, I was telling you that these are level 2s, so it's actually very helpful for your laddering, actually. It's like a very weird part of the synergy that I didn't think of. This gives me back the talents, because I'm like, there's nothing else that's useful. I mean, I could give you back Smashers, and that, like, you know, if I could put another Sprite body on field, could be useful, but, you know, what if he now has drawn a hand trap or something? So I reset, send the evenly match, which will not be useful again. I bring out the Arcia by shuffling back the Arcia by shuffling back the Arciella, okay, with very confusing names. And here is my mistake, guys. Here's my mistake. So I made two mistakes now, two big mistakes now. I should have been thinking, how do I OTK? But I wasn't. I was just thinking, I'm going to put him really close to 0, and this card gives me a draw. I have some options. I could turn it into a Little Knight, or I could just leave it on the field. I could turn it into a Chaos Angel, even though there's nothing to banish, with one of these level 4s, because then it would make sure that whatever he draws, like no monster effects can interact with my Diabell, so he can't stop the Diabell bringing out a Silvera, and then he can't stop the Silvera because the Chaos Angel will protect them because it was summoned with a light monster, so they'll be unaffected by monster effects. So I was thinking, yeah, maybe I make the Chaos Angel after, and then, you know, like there's no way he beats this because we're in a grind. I knew from my last turn when he summoned this that he was almost out of resources, so that's what I was thinking. Okay, so this is what happens. I attack, I attack, I attack, I attack. And I'm like, okay, he's at 400. Now I'm going to make a Draco Berserker. I'm going to pass turn. Now, maybe you already know, guys, but Silvera has a secret effect, all right? A secret effect in Yu-Gi-Oh! Means that it is written on the card, and if you just read the fucking card, okay, you'll know what the effect does. But the card isn't popular for that effect, so most people don't know about it. Okay, so this says, if this card is special summoned, activation procedure, you can change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position. And by the way, remember, guys, this does not have to send a spell or trap. So this is cool. This means that if you run out of spell and traps, you don't need them to Book of Eclipse. Then it says, guys, Illusion and Spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack. And then it's double piercing. This Tri-Edge Master that I summoned is 2100 attack. This starts at 19, but it gains 500 because it's an Illusion or Spellcaster synchro monster. So it goes up to 2400, which would have killed him. And it also boosts my Diabell to 3 grand, so we would have overkilled him. And then it wouldn't even have mattered that I'd summoned the Silvera that I only play one of, because I can just shuffle it back at any point with either Arcia or Sylve, and then on his turn, I just send whatever spell I want with the Abel to bring it back. So yeah, and because I had both of these in the grave, I actually could have done that twice. I could have eclipsed them twice. So that was a mistake on my part. Okay, now he summons this card, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to send a card, but I'm going to eclipse this. He has to show me an extender because I know he's on very low resources. So I Book of Eclipse, smell you later, add the reset back to hand. Now he summons Tour Guide. I'm like, I could save the Veiler for later, but again, I know that he's low on resources. So this is like, when you know that they're low on resources is when it is actually appropriate to like early interrupt people before they set stuff up, because you never know, like especially if you don't know how the deck works, if they can get their card economy in like proper rotation. So yeah, I throw out the Veiler, which I love because it's searchable. And yeah, so now let me go back to the deck and give you some closing thoughts on this. So this is a first pass at Whitewood Spright. I think that it is correct to put the Sylve at 1 when you're increasing the number of normal summons so drastically. I think that you could play another Angler, but I was already getting some weird draws in like my test hands, and so I thought like I just don't want to have more bad draws, especially if you think like, when you're going first, you don't want to draw this card. You accept that you can draw it because you don't know what will happen with the dice roll. But you don't want to go first and have like 1, 2, 3, let's say there are 2 anglers, 4, 5 cards. You're getting close to a 50% chance now to see at least one of those cards going first. You just don't want to do that. At least the Thrust and the Talents has use going first, and the Dark Ruler you could use at some point, like hypothetically. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna maximize consistency and accept that my ceiling will suffer a little bit. I think that I think that it's not acceptable to go above 40 in Whitewood's toy, because drawing combinations of cards, the math is really, really bad when you go above 40. Um, People overestimate the consistency loss for 1-card combos when you go above 40, and underestimate the consistency loss for 2-card combos when you go above 40. So if you have a 2-card combo deck, I highly suggest that you don't go above 40, unless your deck has a bunch of highly functionally redundant cards in it, like Branded, where like all of it is gas anyhow, so your ratios aren't technically getting worse. Um, I don't like that I didn't have space for Gallant Granite, because I really like the Nib Veiler combo, and also Nib counts as a high impact non-engine, unlike most hand traps, so it doesn't like hurt your ratios too badly. I think maybe that Masquerena could have been an option so that you can SP out of turn, but the way that I was playing the deck, where you're leaving the Sprint and the Gigantic on field, it's like, good enough. And then usually the Smashers will get rid of your other Spright monster. Um, I think I would side the Spright double cross. Like if I was actually building this deck, I would side the double cross for when I know I'm going first. Um, and I think one thing that I don't know about yet, that I really really like in the idea of power spell. Wait, is this not super poly? There we go. Is super polymerization. And the reason that I like this is, if you've been paying attention to how I describe the importance of game 1 of the dice roll, is that cards like Thrust and Talents are special, because even though they're not as high impact as an evenly matched, or like a dimensional barrier or a reframing, the debarrier or the reframing or the evenly matched are high impact on the condition that you are going first or that you are going second, whereas Thrust and Talents are flexible. And so Super Poly is similar to that, because if you go second, you can use it as a breaker they can't respond to. It also helps with weird stuff, sometimes like Calamities decks, like Centurion or Whitewood Centurion, or even sometimes depending on how Branded is set it up, because you can't use Sanctifier's fusion material. Sometimes you can set it up to where you can Super Poly and like interrupt them, or at least get some type of play. So I like this because it's flexible in the dice roll, but I haven't really been testing it that much, because I don't really know what people are playing on Omega. Like Omega Ladder is super random stuff right now, but I think that this could be good next meta. Um, and it's also possible. So sometimes your opponent will try to go for this card, Fiendsmith Engraver and two Light Fiend monsters, and their combos where they'll put like Sequentia on field and where's Sequentia on field, and they'll have maybe like Closed Heaven and then the Fiendsmith Engraver. And you know that they're about to use the Tractus Engrave because you can banish where's this? You can banish this card from your graveyard. That's the cost. Fusion summon a Fiendsmith fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. So you this one doesn't allow you to use from your grave. And so they telegraph if they're going for this card, and Super Poly blows that out. But then you'd have to play your own Fiendsmith Dies Irae. Everyone is going to be on Fiendsmith, so I actually think that it is somewhat reasonable for you to put a Fiendsmith monster in your extra deck, maybe. But I don't know how many decks will be playing this card, because this is a lot harder to make than the Lacrimosa. So anyhow, I don't want to make this video too much longer, but those are my general thoughts here. I think you could maybe play another Little Knight. I think Triage Master is maybe not necessary, but I really like making it to go into Chaos Angel, even if I'm going first and I just want to protect my Synchro monsters. So I almost want to play two of these sometimes, one for going first in some situations and one for going second, or sorry, one for like after the game has progressed. And my main takeaway is that these cards, the Synchro 12 cards, have not really come up in this particular version. So I think that maybe I would keep in Legatia because making a Synchro 12 does come up and making two of them doesn't. And this one at least gives you a draw and a pop. But I feel like these three cards could maybe come out. Maybe I would put in like a second Chaos Angel and then some other like Spright monsters. So anyhow, that's the video for today. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any feedback, leave it in the comments and I will respond. I try to respond to everything.